I always loved the city at night. There was something electric about the way the neon lights danced off the pavement, casting shadows that seemed to pulse with life. The streets were alive, filled with laughter and music, yet there was a disquieting undercurrent that thrummed beneath the surface. I never really noticed it until he came into my life. It started innocuously enough. I was just a waitress at a late-night diner, my shift ending at 2 in the morning. The diner, a faded relic of the 50s, served greasy burgers and endless cups of coffee. My regulars were the usual mix of insomniacs and night owls, and I liked it that way. One night, as I was wiping down the counter, I noticed him for the first time. He was sitting in a corner booth, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a worn baseball cap. He had a penchant for ordering the same thing every night: black coffee and a slice of pie. He was unremarkable, and yet there was something unsettling about the way he watched me. I brushed it off as paranoia after all. The city had a way of amplifying fears. But as the days turned into weeks, his presence became a fixture in my nightly routine. I found myself glancing over at him, wondering if he was still watching. The way he tilted his head when I approached to take his order sent a chill down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, that I was being overly dramatic. He never spoke more than a few words, but I could feel his eyes tracing my movements. Then, one night, it happened. I stepped outside for a breath of fresh air, the cool air tinged with the faint scent of rain. As I leaned against the brick wall, I caught sight of him across the street. He stood under a flickering streetlight, watching me. I froze, my heart pounding. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, and I half expected him to start walking toward me. Instead, he just stood there, unmoving, as if I were the only thing in the world that mattered. I rushed back inside, the bell above the door jingling as I slammed it shut. My manager noticed my unease and asked if I was all right. I nodded, forcing a smile, but I knew I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being hunted. The next few nights he was back in his usual booth, but his demeanor had changed. He no longer just watched, he seemed to anticipate my movements. If I spilled coffee, he would chuckle softly, as if he found it amusing. My nerves frayed with each passing shift, and I confided in a coworker, Sarah. She was skeptical, telling me I was reading too much into it. "You're just tired," she said. "It's the night shift getting to you." But deep down, I knew something was wrong. One evening, I noticed a small notebook lying on the floor near his booth. I picked it up and hesitated. Should I return it to him? I flipped it open, my hands trembling, and my breath hitched in my throat. The pages were filled with meticulous notes about me, what I wore each night, the conversations I had, even the way I smiled at the regulars. My heart raced as I realized this was more than just an infatuation, this was obsession. I confronted him the next time he came in. "What is this?" I demanded, holding the notebook out. He looked at me with a strange mix of amusement and annoyance. "You shouldn't have touched that," he said softly. "It's for your own good." My blood ran cold, and I stumbled back, the diner's fluorescent lights suddenly feeling too bright, too harsh. I wanted to leave, to escape, but I was trapped in that neon-lit prison. I told Sarah about the notebook, but she dismissed it again, insisting I was overreacting. The next night, I gathered my courage and decided to confront him again. But when I arrived, he was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. That night, I received a message on my phone, an unknown number. "I saw you leave the diner tonight. You should be careful." My skin crawled as I read the words. I looked outside, half expecting to see him lurking in the shadows, but the street was empty. In a moment of desperation, I decided to report him to the police. The officer listened patiently as I described him, my voice trembling with fear. But when I finished, he gave me a sympathetic smile. "There's not much we can do unless he makes a move," he said. "Just keep your doors locked and stay vigilant." I felt a mix of anger and hopelessness. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that I was already living in a nightmare, but instead, I nodded numbly and left. The city became a prison, a maze of dark streets and lurking shadows. I stopped answering my phone and avoided the windows. Each night, I listened to the sounds of the city cars honking, sirens wailing, but there was always an underlying silence, the sound of someone waiting, watching. One night, I gathered enough courage to go out for groceries. The store was quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. As I walked through the aisles, I could feel a sense of dread creeping over me. I paid quickly, my eyes darting around for any sign of him. As I exited, the air felt heavy. I rushed to my car, fumbling with the keys, but my breath caught in my throat. There he was, leaning against my vehicle, a sickening smile spread across his face. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice dripping with malice. My heart raced as I stumbled backward, panic clawing at my throat. I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the stillness. I didn't stop until I reached the diner, desperate to find safety among the familiar faces. But when I burst through the door, the late-night crowd seemed oblivious to my fear. He wasn't here, not yet. But I knew it wouldn't end here. I couldn't live like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, living in fear of shadows. I needed to confront him, to take back control. I started planning. I'd wait until he returned to the diner, and then I would confront him in front of everyone. I spent days preparing, rehearsing my words in the mirror, imagining his face when I finally stood up to him. The night arrived, thick with tension. I worked my shift, heart racing, eyes scanning the room. And then I saw him, slipping into his usual booth. I approached, forcing myself to breathe. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. He looked up, that infuriating smirk still plastered on his face. "I was wondering when you'd come to me." The diner fell silent, the other customers looking on as I faced him. "You've been following me, watching me. It needs to stop." He leaned back, feigning innocence. "I'm just looking out for you, Alice. You need someone to protect you in this dark world." My stomach churned at his words. "I don't need your protection. I need you to leave me alone." He chuckled, a low, haunting sound. "You don't understand. I can't leave you alone. We're meant to be together." Panic surged through me as I realized the depth of his delusion. "You're sick. You need help." At that moment, the door swung open, and a man stepped in, a police officer, called in by a concerned customer. My heart raced as I pointed him out. "That's him. He's been stalking me." The officer approached, and for the first time I saw a flicker of fear in the man's eyes, quickly replaced by defiance. As the officer questioned him, I slipped out of the diner, needing air. But the moment I leaned against the wall, I felt him behind me, grinning like a maniac. "You can't escape me, Alice," he whispered. A scream caught in my throat as I realized I was still in danger. I turned and ran, the city that once felt like a sanctuary now a trap. The lights blurred into a kaleidoscope as I sprinted down the streets, his laughter echoing in my ears, taunting me. I ran beneath the neon glow, through the hollow streets filled only with fear, knowing I was never truly safe. The atmosphere on Halloween was electric, with costumed children roaming the streets, houses decorated with flickering jack-o'-lanterns, and the air rich with the earthy smell of autumn leaves mingling with the faint scent of bonfires. Despite the festive atmosphere, I chose to stay in. Halloween has always been just another night for me, a time to curl up with a good book, away from the noise. However, that night felt different. Living alone is significant because when strange occurrences unfold, there's no one around to verify them or reassure me that I'm not imagining things. After a long day at work, I had been home for hours, enjoying the dwindling sounds of trick-or-treaters outside. I found solace in the quiet, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards. It was all familiar and comforting. Yet something felt off in the house that night. There was an unsettling presence, something that didn't belong. It started small. A rustle outside my window. A faint clicking sound, like the back door unlocking. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind. The mind plays tricks, especially on nights like Halloween. I tried to settle back into my routine. But then, I noticed things weren't where I left them. A cup that was on the kitchen counter earlier had somehow moved to the living room. My jacket, usually hung neatly on the hook, was draped over the back of a chair instead. I tried to ignore it, but deep down, something felt wrong. That night, I felt it more than ever, that creeping sensation that I was being watched. I didn't think much of it at first. Halloween is full of shadows, strange lights, and masked faces. But this was different. Every time I turned around, it felt like someone was just beyond the corner of my vision, hiding in the dark, watching me. And then I saw him. It was just after midnight. The last of the children had gone home, and the street was empty. I was about to close my curtains when I saw a figure standing under the flickering streetlight across the road. He wasn't in costume, just dressed in a dark coat. He wasn't moving, just staring. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for him to do something. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching my window. I shut the curtains and locked every door and window in my house. I checked them twice, then 3 times. When I finally worked up the courage to peek outside again, he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was some Halloween prank, someone trying to scare me. It's what people do, right? But then, I found the first note. A small, folded piece of paper slipped under my door while I slept. I'm watching you. I felt my stomach drop. I wanted to believe it was just a joke, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. My hands trembled as I threw the note away, hoping that would be the end of it. But the notes didn't stop. The next one came a few days later. This time, it wasn't under the door. It was on my kitchen table. I like your hair up. Someone had been inside my home. I searched the entire apartment, but there was no sign of forced entry. Everything was exactly where it should be, except for that note. Panic set in. I changed the locks that afternoon, but the uneasy feeling followed me everywhere. No matter what I did, I couldn't shake the sense that someone was watching me. The figure in the dark became a constant presence. Every night, I'd see him standing outside, just beyond the light. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he'd always be gone. I tried to explain, but they never took it seriously. It's Halloween, they'd say. It's probably some neighborhood kid messing around. But it wasn't a kid. Then came the texts. They weren't from any number I recognized. No caller ID, just messages cold and clinical. Do you feel me watching? I wanted to scream. I went to the police again, but there was nothing they could do. No threats, they said. Just someone trying to scare you, but I wasn't scared. I was terrified. I tried to go about my life as normally as I could, but it felt like the walls were closing in. Every night I saw him. Every night the notes appeared. The texts grew more specific, more personal. That sweater looks nice on you. I liked how you smiled at the barista. I'm closer than you think. I stopped going out. I kept the blinds shut. I didn't answer my phone anymore. But it didn't matter. He was always there. And then last night it all changed. I woke up in the dark. My room was silent, but I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I realized what had been different. The breathing, it wasn't mine. Someone else was in the room. I didn't dare move. I couldn't. I lay there, frozen, gripping the knife I'd started keeping under my pillow. The seconds dragged on like hours, and the sound of that soft, steady breathing filled the room. Then, just as abruptly, Everything fell silent. I remained frozen in place, anticipating some kind of movement, but nothing happened. Gathering my courage, I flipped on the light, only to find the room empty. The door was locked, and the windows were sealed tight. Yet there was a note on my nightstand. Nice try. I feel lost. He's always watching, always lurking. Tonight, I can feel it, he'll come closer. Navigating the world of online dating can be tricky, and I always make it a point to take my time before meeting someone face to face. I like to chat and establish a connection first, ensuring that when we do meet, it's in a public space. I also keep my friends informed about where I am, just for safety's sake. Most of my experiences have been good, even if some dates didn't lead to anything romantic. Recently, I connected with a guy on POV. After chatting for a while and spending hours on the phone, we decided to finally meet. He lived about 45 minutes away in a town I didn't know well, but I felt good about our chemistry. Initially, we talked about me staying at his place, but I opted for a hotel room instead, safer, I thought. However, things took an unexpected turn. After parking my car near a park, I quickly lost my bearings. He drove in so many winding directions that I couldn't keep track. At one point, he suggested I crawl into the back of his van to avoid being seen. Looking back, I should have taken that as a warning sign, but I let my guard down. He even playfully took my phone and tucked it away in a box, claiming it was to hide its location. I foolishly thought we were just having fun. When we arrived at his home, everything seemed normal at first. We watched movies, talked, and enjoyed each other's company. But during dinner, his demeanor shifted. He started asking odd questions that made me uncomfortable. Sensing something was off, I suggested he drive me back to my car, but he refused, thinking I was joking. Feeling uneasy, I managed to get my phone back and messaged a friend, letting her know my location in case I needed help. Deciding to stay the night, I tried to push my worries aside. The night passed without incident, and I eventually made it home safely. To my surprise, we continued talking after that awkward first meeting. He apologized for his behavior, and when we hung out again, it was much more enjoyable. I felt relaxed, and we shared lots of laughs. This time, I willingly stayed the night, feeling more comfortable instead of trapped. He even offered to get my pillow from my bag, which was a kind gesture. But as I settled in, my makeup bag fell out while we were talking, and it was then that I realized just how strange this situation had become. The next morning, he drove me back to my car, but our conversation was minimal. I was busy with bridesmaid duties later that day, but I thought of him and texted him around 2 a.m., a time when we typically chatted. That's when things took a turn for the worse. He became upset, asking about a script I supposedly had for him and demanding to know what I really wanted. I was confused, having no idea what he was talking about. I reminded him that we had agreed to take things slow and start as friends, but he reacted angrily. He called me a stupid out-of-town girl for carrying a makeup bag, claiming it was some kind of act or smokescreen. He interpreted my plans to call him later as a red flag. Feeling bewildered by his accusations, I let the situation go for the time being. A week later, I received a voicemail from him demanding I call him right away. I was at work and ignored the message, but when I later attempted to listen to it, it had mysteriously disappeared. I checked for erased messages, but it was gone. The same thing happened with another voicemail he left that night. When I finally listened to his message, I was shocked by what I heard. He said terrible things, insulting me and accusing me of trying to collect evidence against him with my makeup bag. He threatened to slap me in the mouth, claiming I was being deceitful about my intentions. This was a completely new experience for me, and I was left feeling anxious and unsure about how to respond. I couldn't understand how our interactions had gone from friendly to hostile in such a short time. All I could do was hope things wouldn't escalate further. As I navigated this unsettling situation, I realized I needed to trust my instincts more than ever. I was grateful for the friends I had informed of my whereabouts and for the safety measures I had taken. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I understood the importance of being vigilant, even when things seemed to be going well. Dating can be a mix of experiences, and while I have made some wonderful friends along the way, this particular encounter served as a stark reminder of the risks that come with meeting people online. In the aftermath, I decided it was best to take a break from dating to process what had happened and regain my confidence. It's crucial to remember that not every interaction will lead to friendship or romance sometimes. Things can spiral into uncomfortable or even dangerous situations. I plan to share my experience with friends to raise awareness about the potential pitfalls of online dating. Despite this unsettling encounter, I refuse to let it discourage me from seeking meaningful connections in the future. I would approach future dates with caution, keeping my guard up while remaining open to new experiences. After all, there are many wonderful people out there, and it's important to find them while prioritizing my safety.